Hiya folks, Carl James here from Electric Media Madness. Joining me for another episode of Insightful, I have a very special guest with me today, Mark Devlin. How you doing, sir?
Hello, mate. Yeah, quite tired, busy as ever. Always am. Lots going on.
Yeah, I'm traveling all over the place, haven't you? It's been fascinating watching what you've been up to.
Yeah, lately I've moved house, been to Las Vegas for a weekend, and been to Australia for a week. So if I look a bit tired and jet lagged, it's because I am. So all of that has been in a really short space of time. Got to move again in a few weeks as well. So yeah, it's all happening.
I'm sure our viewers and listeners will not mind, because it's about the content, isn't it, as opposed to
well, yeah, I was saying to you off air there that I like doing radio. I'm a sort of radio guy, not particularly happy about being in front of the camera, but I do it because it's required. And mainly I don't like going on the camera because I look so tired and disheveled all the time.
I think you look all right, mate. I think you look fine.
Okay, well, we'll
So for anybody, if you're not, why are you not? But, you know, if anybody who's not familiar with Mark Devlin's work, please go and check. I think his main central source is the website djmarkdevlin.com. And from there, you can check out his books. I did have all three of them, actually. Musical Truth 1, 2, and 3. I lent Volume 3 to a friend of mine, and I never got it back. So I've got to re-get that, repurchase that.
Well, funnily enough, yesterday I just released my latest book, which is this one.
Gift and
The Gift and the Curse. That's my truth fiction novel.
Yeah.
So the official release date for that was yesterday, which was 9th of November, 9/11.
Right.
So
that's a follow-up, isn't it, to is it The Curse and the Cure? Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, please, people, check those out. Yeah, and check out Mark's Good Vibrations podcast as well. There's so much that you've got. There's just an absolute wealth of material there. Interviews, your own material as well, and
yeah, that's right.
I really encourage people. Absolutely, absolutely encourage people to check it out, because you'll not be disappointed, and it will really give you some interesting perspectives on the world if you're not already clued in on these things. So, which we very much need nowadays, don't we? We really do.
Well,
crazy times we live in.
It's a different world to the one that I used to live in. Going back 20 years, I was a full-time DJ. So I was going up and down the UK, playing gigs all over the place, internationally as well. And it's very similar to what I'm doing now, because I play gigs all over the place now, and I'm traveling internationally again. But now I'm delivering empowering information, truthful information, which is going to uplift and inspire people, hopefully. Yeah. Whereas back in those days, I was just dropping tunes in clubs, and it was all about parties and not a whole lot else. So my life is a bit more meaningful these days, at least.
I think it's one of those things where, because there is quite a degree of overlap, actually, in terms of the research that you do and the research I do. It's different specialities. Yours is music mainly. Lots of other areas as well, but that's a specialized area. And with me, it's sort of like the movies and TV shows, and particularly science fiction.
As I see from your background.
Yeah. But there is a lot of overlap. Well,
there is,
And you know, we quite often come across things, don't we? You and I have sort of sent things backwards and forwards to each other over the years, you know, of things that we've come across. And that kind of nicely leads us into what we're going to talk about today as well. The film Metropolis from, I think it was 1927, wasn't it? And
that's right, nearly 100 years ago. Incredible.
Yeah. And the date that the film is set is 2026 as well, which is literally just around the corner for us now.
Well, I didn't actually realize that.
Yeah. It's interesting you saying about how things have changed, because certainly I think metaphorically, and in terms of fiction and things like that like the more things change, the more they stay the same in some respects, because there's a lot of things going on in this film which could be applied to the world we're living in today, I suppose, really. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, that's the reason I wanted to talk about this particular movie, because it tells us so much about the times in which we're living now. And this is what I find so incredible, because it was made so long ago. And yet we recognize so many of the agendas being pushed, and the symbolism and the research that the likes of you and I and so many others have been doing in recent years. And it's all there. And it just indicates knowledge of subject areas that we're just getting into now in recent times, which were obviously there within so-called elite circles 100 years ago and way beyond that as well. So this movie came from Fritz Lang, the writer and director. He was a German occultist, so he was into, the works of famous occultists of the time.
Yeah, yeah.
and esoteric studies and such. And also he was a Freemason, and so much of his sort of arcane occult knowledge was obviously encoded into this film.
Oh, definitely, yes.
Yeah. And it was a monumental undertaking. This film took apparently 17 months to make, which is quite a long time for a movie. And when you look at it, you consider the amount of extras, the amount of people involved. That would have taken a hell of a lot of arranging and directing. So no wonder it took so long. And yeah, it's on an absolutely epic scale, which is all the more incredible for the time in which it was made.
Yeah.
It's got this futuristic cityscape, which is very reminiscent of the sort of things we're hearing about now. These so-called smart cities, part of the UN's Agenda 2030, 5G smart grid systems linked to social credit score arrangements, and everything linked via internet and such. These ideas were right there in that movie. You've got flying craft going around the high-rise buildings, and you've got these sort of high-speed motorways that look very similar to what we've got today. And apparently Fritz Lang was inspired by a trip to New York at the time.
He was, yeah.
And he was amazed by all these high-rise buildings in Manhattan, and so he sort of recreated his visions of New York in the cityscape for this movie. So it's very futuristic in its themes. It's got things like transhumanism which is a very major part of the plot, actually. So just to give a précis of what the film is about.
Yeah, please do, because some people might not be familiar with it. Yeah.
Sure. So there are lots of different versions of it, actually. I think the original version was about 2.5 hours long. But as with so many movies, it's been chopped and butchered over the years, and you've got various different cuts where they've taken vast swathes of the narrative out. So if people want to watch it, try and track down the original cut, which is about 2.5 hours in length.
I think they restored most of it in 2008, didn't they? If I remember rightly. Yeah, I think it was. They got
there were various,
quite a lot of the old footage back, didn't they? Yeah,
various restorations. There was some hidden, some lost footage, which was recovered, and it was quite damaged. But from the point of view of completism, it was sort of pasted back into the original cut. So for anyone that wants to see some of that lost footage, you can probably see that cut as well. So the basic overview is that you've got this futuristic cityscape. I didn't realize it was set in 2026, but you just enlightened me on that. That explains a lot, because it's similar to a lot of what's happening at the moment. And you've got an elite class, so-called, who live above ground in these amazing high-rise skyscrapers. And the creator of this city is a guy named Jo Fredersen. So he's like the ultimate elite guy who presides over this city. But then you've got the working class, the laborers, who are toiling away underground on machinery that keeps the city operating. And the city is entirely reliant on this workforce. And at the start of the film, you've got this very memorable scene where you've got one shift of workers about to clock on. And they've all got their heads bowed. They're just completely compliant and subservient. They look like they're completely devoid of spirit, because they're just in these mind-numbingly tedious, laborious jobs. And then another shift is just clocking off, and they're just coming out the elevator and walking the other way with their heads down. It's a very striking scene. And then you see what happens underground, which is all this machinery which causes the city to function. You've got the son of Jo Fredersen, who's this young guy. It's known as Freder. And he doesn't share his father's value system. So very early on, we see that he's someone with a conscience. He's someone with compassion, which gets awakened. And he's somewhat a disappointment to his father, because he doesn't represent those sort of so-called elite values that he has. And this young Freder guy comes across this saintly figure named Maria. And she's played by Brigitte Helm in a very memorable role.
Yeah.
Brigitte Helm was about 17 when they started filming. So she was 17 or 18 in these scenes. Looks a lot older.
Mm.
Actually, quite a beautiful woman.
I think she was, yeah,
I
yeah,
feel,
yeah.
yeah. So she appears as Maria, and she's got this aura about her. She's almost this religious sort of type figure, and she represents love and compassion. And there's a tagline that runs throughout the movie, which is the mediator between the head and the hands must be the heart. So we've
Yeah.
got some
Interesting phrase, that, isn't it? Yeah.
Overtones going on there, yeah.
Mm.
And so she represents the mediator between the elite ruling class of this city and the working class. So Freda becomes fascinated by her, and he pursues her and eventually falls in love with her. But then his father gets wind of what's going on, and there's this secondary storyline involving this crazy inventor, this mad scientist. He's got the sort of wiry hair, and he looks like the stereotypical crazy scientist. And his name is Rotwang.
Rotwang, yeah.
Rotwang, which translates as red cock, basically. I looked it up.
Yeah.
That's what it means.
Mm.
And it turns out that both Rotwang and Jo Fredersen were in love with the same woman, and her name was Hel, Hel. So it's probably some signaling going on. And she turns out to be the mother of Freda, but she died apparently giving birth to him. And both these guys were in love with this woman. So Rotwang, the crazy inventor, has made this robot, which is where we get into transhumanism. And we see an image, very striking image of this android type thing sat in a chair. And in the room is a bloody great pentagram on the floor.
Yes, yeah.
A satanic pentagram. So
Yeah.
that's a symbol that we're all sort of getting used to now. And there it was 100 years ago. And Rotwang's idea is that he's somehow transported the spirit or the soul of this woman Hel into what's known as the machine man. So this robot is called the machine man, even though it sort of embodies a woman.
Woman, yeah.
And so Jo Fredersen asks Rotwang to create a version of this machine man, this android, based around Maria. So he wants to capture Maria's soul essence and transport it into this robot, and then to put the robot in among the workers, the working class, because they've learned of a potential rebellion among the workers. So the idea is to put Maria in there because all the working class look up to her and respect her and are in reverence to her.
Yeah.
But they want an evil version of Maria who leads them astray. And so when they create the robot version of Maria, she looks very different to the original Maria.
Oh, yes, definitely.
This one looks very dark, and she's got these dark circles around her eyes, like this eyeshadow type thing. And straight away, that made me think of a very dark subject area that many of us have looked into lately, which is adrenochrome. And we hear that with adrenochrome extraction, it often results in black circles around the eyes. So I don't know if that's what was being hinted at back then, but if it was, that's amazing because it means that agenda was going on in the 1920s. And she's got this thing, this sort of tick where one of her eyes keeps closing, the left eye keeps closing. I think there's some signaling going on there, maybe symbolizing the left-hand path or the left brain. So she just keeps winking with this eye with the black shadow and stuff, and that's how you know it's the robot version of Maria and not the original. So she gets sent into the workers below ground, and they all believe that she's the real Maria, and she incites them to rebellion. But what's happened is the mad creator Rotwang has got his own agenda, and he wants to topple or overthrow Jo Fredersen, the top guy in the city. And so he set this robot Maria off on her own agenda to destroy this machine, which is known as the heart machine. So that symbolizes the heart of the city. Without it, the city can't operate. And she incites the workers to destroy this machine. and it results in these underground areas becoming flooded, and everyone has to come up above ground, and children have to be rescued because they're in danger of being swept away by this flood. And all the time, Freda, this young guy, the son of the main guy in the city, is pursuing Maria, and he thinks that the robot Maria is the real one. The workers eventually turn on her, and they tie her to a stake and set her on fire. And Freda is horrified because he thinks it's the real Maria. But as she burns and she's cackling away and laughing and just being completely maniacal, we come to see that it was actually a robot after all, and the workers realize that they've been duped. So I'll just pause there in case you want to jump in with any observations, but that's a basic overview of the plot line there.
It's a fascinating story, isn't it? It really is. It's like you say, there's the transhumanism thing there. Obviously, there's things that you pointed out about the imagery, the pentagram. I noticed quite a few of them, actually. There's, I think, mainly around sort of Rockwang's house. There's some of the lower level doors had got them on the doors as well. It was on the floor and on the wall behind the robot Maria as well.
There was some hand signaling going on as well.
There was,
triangle of manifestation of pyramid hand sign being made by Yofre.
I mean, we can probably look at some of the symbolism first before we go off into any other areas, because I just thought some of it was fascinating. Some of the numerology in it as well, like just little things like you notice in the lift numbers and things like that. I kept finding multiples of 11s and 6s and things like that when you added up all the numbers of the lift numbers.
51? I think 51.
Yeah, things like that.
Yeah. Made me think of Area 51 in Nevada, this underground base.
Just like of course, obviously there's the machine, the Moloch as well. That's another big one, isn't it?
Yeah. We got a couple of dark themes going on there. So
that one,
there's a point where Freda starts hallucinating and he's having these nightmarish visions, and he sees the heart machine turning into Moloch, this figure out of ancient mythology. To which children were evidently sacrificed. And he just has these terrifying visions of this machine turning into this entity.
And devouring the workers. It's
devouring the workers,
It's the ritual sacrifice, isn't it? And like you say, and of course the Saturn worship aspects of Moloch as well, that's all about ritual sacrifice as well. So
that's right.
Sorry,
and then a bit later in the movie, he's in bed because he's hallucinating, and he's sort of had to be like hospitalized, and he keeps waking up in bed with a start with these terrifying visions, and he's seeing Maria, who by this point is the robot Maria, having turned into the whore of Babylon. So she's representing that imagery.
I got a lot of notes on that.
There's biblical overtones. There's a lot of this esoteric spiritual imagery that we're all quite familiar with now. And again, it's just incredible to me that knowledge was being displayed almost a century ago, and very few in the film-going audience would have been familiar with this symbolism and known what it meant, I would suggest.
Probably not, no.
Only really high-level adept occultists with some very advanced knowledge would be able to recognize these themes, but they're all in there.
One of the things that I thought was interesting with the time and the sort of the cubism, the surrealism, the expressionism, sort of that art movement at that point in time, which is clearly in the film, isn't it? And Fritz Lang was clearly inspired by all that sort of style of doing things as well. And
Echo as well.
Of course, and I don't know how much you've looked into it. I mean, only a cursory for me, but sort of how certain elite types steered those art movements as well, of course, and moved so much of that symbolism into that esoteric occult symbolism into that sort of art movement.
It's 1927, but it's portraying a scene which looks very modern, very contemporary to these times. That city just looks like a city that we have these days. So I'm just astounded by how long ago that thing was made, and obviously everyone involved in it is now deceased. But what an incredible legacy was left behind. I'm not entirely sure what Fritz Lang's intentions were. whether it was to sort of uplift or educate humanity in some way and communicate empowering information, or whether it was some sort of occult mockery of the apparent profanity or ignorance of the masses, whether it was revelation of the method in some way, you know, which they like to do, placing the truth in plain sight. I don't know what his intentions were behind putting that movie out. Evidently, it was a bloody pain in the ass to make. It took so long. It cost the equivalent of £21 million in today's money. And the studio must have been very frustrated with how long it was taking to get out.
I believe it bankrupted the company, didn't it? If I'm right, I believe it bankrupted the UAF. Was it the company that made it?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
It still stands up today. It's quite surprising, actually, in terms of how it looks. And it's undoubtedly it's inspired things like Blade Runner and films like that, you know, with the cityscapes and all that. That sort of Going back to your point you're making about the what it was that he was trying to convey, I completely agree with you. All of those things. I think it's probably all of those things as well. But one of the things that I picked up on there was the socio-political thing as well. The timing of when it was being made in Germany, sort of just leading up to that point with Hitler and all that, you know, that kind of thing. One of the fiercest critics of the time was the Communist Party in Russia, I think it was, because it was sort of ardently socialism aspect to it that was coming from it. I think you can see the socialism in it, can't you?
Well, you can, particularly in that opening scene where the working crowds are getting ready to log on for their shift, and they all look the same. They're all wearing these flat caps, which are very reminiscent of Soviet Russia. And it's quite communistic in nature in terms of what's being portrayed.
Which is strange that the Communist Party would have been quite critical of it, you know. So well, make of that what you would.
Close to the truth, maybe.
Absolutely. And,
what we've got portrayed there is exactly the same dynamic that we have in society today, which is
absolutely
a working class, effectively a slave class, subservient to the elite ruling class and completely reliant upon them. But then again, the elites are completely reliant upon the workers because they can't survive without them. But society in that movie is structured pretty much in the same way as it still is, because nothing's changed majorly. We've had movements, socialism and communism and whatever, fascism, whatever labels you want to put on it. But the same structure in human society is with us today, because it would take something very radical to ever change that.
When you look at the because one of the reason why I wanted to tie that to that as well was because I've noticed with a lot of the sort of, I don't like the term, but the sort of wokey type stuff that's around at the moment, as they call it, you know, I'm not particularly fond of that word, but how a lot of that has got esoteric symbolism in it as well, that sort of extreme left socio-political thinking. There's a lot of esoteric, a lot of occult symbolism attached to that as well. So those things going hand in hand with Metropolis all that time back as well. You know, so it's one of those things. It's always there, isn't it? You know, it's
When you become symbol literate, you see this stuff everywhere. When you learn to spot these signs and symbols and sigils and icons and motifs, then you do tend to spot it. You know, you can go back decades and watch old movies, and you're like, oh my days, look, they're just making a symbol there that I've only just learned about, and all those decades ago, there it was. So there obviously was a very potent reason for this movie to get put out against all the odds. And as I say, we can puzzle as to what the true motives were. But it's just an incredible piece of work.
Absolutely. You mentioned before about the tagline, the mediator between brain and hand must be the heart. That midsection where it goes into sort of all the biblical stuff. And it ties in again to the Scarlet Woman, the Babylon ritual, all that kind of stuff, and the Tower of Babel comes into it as well. And of course, that was about people's inability to communicate with each other, which I thought was a fascinating idea in it as well, because you have these groups of people that, even though they're living together and they talk about the mediator, but they can't reach any common ground, can they?
Yeah, and that's a religious motif, a mediator. So you could take something like Christianity, and Christians are told that the only way to God, to heaven, to salvation is through Jesus, the figure of Jesus. So he's the mediator. And it's the same thing with many other religions, you know, Krishna in Hinduism and such. And when there's this talk of the mediator between the head, which is represented in the movie by the elite class, Jo Fredersen, and the hands, which are the workers, being the heart, it made me think of the middle way that we hear of in Buddhism. You know, supposedly Buddha taught that the way to salvation is the middle way, to walk that middle path. I remember watching the movie Little Buddha with Keanu Reeves many years ago. Great movie.
Good film,
Taught me a lot about, you know, Buddhist beliefs. And I just remember that talk of the middle way. And that seems to be something else that's getting conveyed here with the idea of the mediator. The interesting thing about the robot Maria, or the machine man, is that it's inspired so many music artists. And it's almost as if every major pop artist of the last 15 to 20 years has at some point appeared in robotic form, android form, very much based around the machine man out of Metropolis. Madonna's done that. Beyonce has appeared on stage as this robot thing. Lady Gaga, I think Britney Spears has done it. It just seems to be a prerequisite of being a successful pop artist now. So again, that's another lasting legacy of this movie, just that android idea. And it was very clearly communicating transhumanism. You know, Rot Wang is transferring the soul energy of Maria into this android thing. Interestingly, she still survives, so she doesn't die. You still have the genuine original, Maria, one, who survives to the end of the movie. But you've also got this robot version of her where her likeness has been transported in it. And that's the central idea of transhumanism, you know, the marrying together of humanity and machinery, technology. So those ideas were around almost 100 years ago. And maybe that's why we see so many depictions of this android robot from Metropolis, because this is a very big agenda that's being pushed now. AI, transhumanism, this total reliance on technology to do everything. It's a major part of the elite agendas, and it clearly has been for a very long time.
Interesting you mentioning about those particular pop stars as well, because as you and I know, there's a lot of allusions to sort of mind control and triggers and things like that. And I thought about the two, you know, the robot and the original Maria, the real Maria, and it's almost like alters the way you described it before. The expressions, it's almost like a dissociate, you know, different personalities, that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, it is. So you've got the two versions of Maria, and there are allusions there, as you say, to mind control, where you've got dissociative identity disorder, multiple personality disorder. You have these alters that are created as a result of MK Ultra style mind control experimentation, trauma-based mind control. So that seems to have been a theme in it as well. So you've got these two different versions of Maria. I actually found the sort of the bad Maria to be quite attractive and sexy, actually, which is it's probably a dark, twisted side of me coming through. But yeah, I did find her quite attractive, Brigitte Helm. She was quite interesting because she went on to have loads and loads of car accidents. She was reportedly a really bad driver. And there was one incident where she reportedly killed somebody in a road accident, and she got off, but you know, really terrible driver. And she didn't do many films after Metropolis. She grew very disillusioned with the Nazi Party, which was gaining momentum in Germany in the 1930s. And she felt that the film industry of the time was very strongly linked to the Nazi Party. She had no part in it. So she kind of stepped away from the industry, didn't do many films, didn't do many interviews beyond that. But yeah, very interesting woman.
Similar thing happened with Fritz Lang as well, didn't it? Because he, they loved his stuff and they wanted to use it for propaganda. Obviously, he left and went to America, you know.
Right. Yeah, I didn't know what happened to him after that.
I can't remember when he died. I think it was in the 70s, something like that. 1976, I think, something like that. So, yeah, his career kind of... But even so, you know, I mean, after the fact, there's some strange films. I don't know if you've ever seen M. the one with Peter Lorre, the child killer.
No, not seen that.
Very, very dark film.
Mm.
I won't go into too much detail because obviously this will go up on YouTube, and YouTube
Right.
doesn't like certain subjects being talked about. But
Yeah.
yeah, that is a very dark and disturbing film. That's a Fritz Lang one. I think that was 1933. So
Yeah, I don't know much more about what else he did. You're obviously way, way more clued up on movies than me. Uh, I'm someone that I do love movies, but I'm very picky about the ones that I choose to watch. I'm not a big fan of blockbusters. Uh, I'm not a big fan of science fiction, to be honest. I
right,
just
okay.
don't get inside most of it. But every now and again, I just find a film that absolutely captivates me and fascinates me, and I study it endlessly. And I dearly love films like that just have that special something about them. And Metropolis definitely fits the bill. I first saw it many, many years ago, didn't understand the symbolism, but there was just something special about it. I knew that it had been used by Queen in the video
Radio
to their
Gaga,
song
yeah.
Radio Gaga. So maybe we should get into the music side of things.
Can do, yeah.
Yeah. So I remember watching the video to Radio Gaga by Queen, which came out in early 1984, of all years, go figure, from their album The Works. And The Works makes me think of, that underground machinery that was there in the city. And they've got a track on that album actually called Machines and Back to Humans. And it's about transhumanism.
So in
the video to Radio Gaga, which was the first single from that album, you've got the group, Queen, transposed into scenes from Metropolis. So they're in this flying craft, sort of going around the city, flying around these skyscrapers and stuff. And evidently the group was very into the movie Metropolis. My studies into Queen have demonstrated to me that the driving force behind that group was Brian May.
He was the big science. Yeah, he was a big science fiction fan as well. So yeah.
Well, he's an astrophysicist, so-called these days. Reincarnation of Sir Isaac Newton, I think, looking at him. But Brian May was always the driving force behind Queen. And I've put together a presentation, actually, which I've not delivered yet. I was supposed to do it in Newcastle the other week, but I haven't done it publicly yet. And it's called Dark Occult Aspects of Queen. So I've really gone into that group. And it would appear that they were quite fascinated by occult ideas. And I think most of this was coming from Brian May. So Brian May appears to be the one that was very much into the ideas being put forward by Metropolis. And it was probably his idea to base the video around that. So that same year, 1984, there was a new soundtrack to that movie that was made by Giorgio Moroder.
Yeah.
So the original Metropolis was a silent movie. It had captions in German, but you can also get a version where it's translated into English. But then there was a music soundtrack put to it in 1984 by Giorgio Moroder, this amazing Italian producer who worked out of Munich. He was the producer of Donna Summer's I Feel Love, which was a landmark piece of work.
Great piece of music, whatever people might say about Giorgio Moroder. And
he was an amazing musician, great producer. And he put together this soundtrack which featured Freddie Mercury. There was a song called Love Kills, which came out later that year, and it had Adam Ant and various other contemporary artists at the time. And so Metropolis was kind of restored, and there was a color version of it with this new soundtrack added, and Queen were a part of that whole project. So I think that's the first time I came across it, actually, in 84.
It was with me as well. Yeah, I distinctly remember seeing it being shown at school. So I'm giving my age away a little bit now. I think it was about 9, something like that. I remember it. They put it on at school for us this one day, end of term type thing or something like that. And it was the colorized musical version. Yeah.
Right.
That would have been my first exposure to it as well. Yeah.
That's right, because I was into Queen at the time, and I liked that Freddie Mercury track, and I heard about this Giorgio Moroder soundtrack, and I was like, oh, what's this movie? So yeah, that must have been the first time I saw it. And there's just been different versions of it. And as I say, it's inspired many music makers as well, because the scenes from Metropolis and there's ideas and themes which have cropped up in many music videos over the years, particularly that robot android thing.
Absolutely. I wonder as well if we might talk a little bit about, because it's just an area that I'm fascinated in, but it's also an area that you probably have a lot of insight into as well, is the ritual of the Scarlet Woman, the Babylon work and all that, which is heavily talked about in Metropolis, isn't it? And the illusion is that the bad Maria is like the evocation of the Scarlet Woman as well, riding in on the beast with the 8 heads, is it, and all that kind of thing,
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm fascinated with that because of the whole Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard out in the desert doing their rituals based on Crowley stuff, and as a sci-fi fantasy guy as well, love my Twin Peaks, and that's David Lynch's thing, and that's all about that kind of stuff as well, but it's really heavily there with all these pop stars, isn't it, as well, and the music,
Yeah.
that whole thing.
Well, I guess the evocation of the Scarlet Woman there, the Whore of Babylon, was the equivalent from those times of what we get now with these big music events like the US Super Bowl halftime show, the Grammys, the MTV VMAs. Those events in these times have become mass energy harvesting occult rituals. They're watched by millions and millions of people around the world, and they get more and more occult and satanic with every passing year, if you know what you're looking for.
They do,
and every time you think they've taken it as far as they possibly can and get away with it, they go even further the next year. Just look at Sam Smith's performance at the Grammys this year. It's a blatant display of Satanism. But if you think about what was getting portrayed in Metropolis, that was going out to the audiences of the time, which would only have been a fraction of the numbers that we now have. But anyone going to the cinema in the 1920s to watch that movie was witness to these occult rituals, and they were giving their attention to it. And that's one of the reasons why they do these things, because energy goes where attention flows. If you've got millions of people directing their consciousness towards a particular scene or a particular idea or a particular theme, there's a belief that you can actually help to manifest that and bring it into physical reality within occult traditions. And so that would have been the contemporary version of what we now see at things like the Super Bowl and all the rest of it. Of course, now you've got millions and millions more people that watch these things and are having their energy zapped unbeknownst to them. And are also possibly having their consciousness and their creativity exploited to bring about certain ideas.
No doubt whatsoever. Absolutely with you on that one. Yeah, no doubt whatsoever. Yeah. That thing of the imagery, though, just alone the imagery with the ritual going on. I think several years back, you and I came on your Good Vibrations podcast, and we talked about the 2012 Olympics, the ceremonies and that.
Oh yeah.
And when I did my book about that, and I put in all the how many times you see people dressed up in the red garb, Annie Lennox coming in on a barge of the dead, and Rihanna dressed in the red, all they do. It's so blatant, isn't it?
Well, the 2012 Grammys was where Nicki Minaj exorcised Roman Zelensky, this entity that she said lived within her. She said it's this homosexual male. Roman Zelensky, obviously based around the film director Roman Polanski, but very disturbing because it hints at entity attachment, demonic possession. And Nicki Minaj appeared on stage with this guy dressed as the Pope and was said to be performing this exorcism. Hang on a minute. Wasn't that supposed to be about entertainment? Aren't the Grammys and all these music shows supposed to be about, just fun? So why are we getting dark occult rituals being portrayed on stage in front of millions of people? Well, it's because it's not about fun and entertainment, as we know.
Not at all.
Agendas at play here. But yeah, that was disturbing enough, and that was 2012. Think how much further they've taken everything since then. It was very interesting hearing you reference Metropolis being based in 2026. We're obviously very close to that now. And it made me think of the movie Soylent Green.
Oh, yeah, that's
obviously.
I think that's set around about now as well.
Well, yeah, that
not exactly when, but
was made in 1973, so it's much more modern than Metropolis. I think the book came out in the 1960s. The film was made in 1973 with Charlton Heston.
Yeah.
And interestingly, the storyline to it was set in 2022.
Right. I knew it was about now, but I wasn't sure exactly when. Yeah.
So the idea was that it was set in New York, and it had become overcrowded, overpopulated. People were living in extreme squalor. There was an extreme shortage of food, and there was an extreme disparity between the elite ruling class and the workers, the regular folk.
Which is when you want some of this stuff.
Oh, well, maybe not actually.
Or not, as the case may be.
I'd give that one a swerve.
No.
Yeah,
you're right.
Spoiler alert for anyone that's not seen the movie. You might want to dip the volume now, but the classic line from it, from Charlton Heston at the end, is "Soylent Green is people." So they're using dead bodies.
Yeah, I mean, all joking aside. Yeah, it's
as a food source, yeah. And it's set in 2022, and back in 1973 it was depicting this nightmare futuristic dystopian society. Has there ever been a futuristic movie where the society isn't dystopian? Have you ever seen a futuristic movie where there's joy and abundance and happiness and everyone's loving life? Doesn't really happen, does it?
Not very often. I mean, even the ones that you could sort of call utopian, like maybe some aspects of Star Trek, even that's got a lot of violence with all the other alien races and things like that. So it's hardly like a complete out and out utopia. So I think you're probably right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is I've just written this book, and during the process, I just came to realize that the most gripping, the most thrilling stories that are really going to hold an audience's attention are ones where the characters are in extreme peril, where there's danger, where there's violence, where terrible things happen. They are the most interesting stories. If you try and make a story interesting when it's all about love and abundance and peace and happiness, I don't think it would make for a very interesting story. So
that's strange you saying that, because I am actually one of the very few people in the world who's the opposite to that. I am really, I will watch things like that, but I generally tend to watch them more sort of for research purposes or looking for the symbolism. I probably have got a few examples of those types of things that I do like, but yeah, I've always been sort of more into the peaceful, happy clappy.
Oh, well, that's good.
Maybe that's just me. Maybe it's just me,
Most people seem to like the death and the destruction and carnage and chaos. But with that story, I mean, not to deviate too much.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
With that book, I wanted to ultimately end it on a positive, uplifting note. I didn't want violence everywhere and death everywhere. So what I've tried to do is dish out natural law, karmic consequences to each of the characters. So I think at the end of the story, most readers would agree that every character gets what they deserve based on their chosen behaviors and actions.
Right.
So that's what I've tried to do with that story. But anyway, that's an aside.
That's good. Yeah. I'm all for that. Yeah.
So
that whole thing of, sorry, go on.
Yeah. What were we talking about? Soylent Green.
And we're talking about those films that are set in that sort of that paradigm, the dystopian future. Yeah.
Around these times. So they were putting a year on it, and they were saying this storyline is taking place in the 2020s. And here we are. So I remember in Soylent Green, food was so scarce, they've come up with this food sort of synthetic like supplement thing, which is dead bodies, as we'd said. But there's a scene where this guy, I think is it Charlton Heston's cop character? He takes a spoon of strawberry jam.
Oh, yeah. We sit with Edward G. Robinson.
Yeah. It's an absolute delicacy just to have a spoon of strawberry jam because only the rich can afford that. And so that's the nightmarish future that was predicted. And then you've got Edward G. Robinson, who volunteers to go into this euthanasia program, where you get these few moments of absolute pleasure and bliss before you bow out of this world. And then they end up using the bodies. But that was a pretty dark element.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's quite interesting how a lot of these films that we were talking about, whether they were sort of set late 60s, early 70s, early 80s even, they tend to sort of fall around about now. in terms of their prediction dates, don't they? I mean, just like Blade Runner, I think is 2019. I think that was predicting that. And that's another one has got the scarcity thing as well, because no one can have real animals. They're all artificial animals, like the replicant humans, which is transhumanism as well. And I think there's a conversation in the film about, do you think I'd be able to afford a real animal? That kind of thing. Yeah. So again, it's that idea, isn't it?
I think there might be some good news here in that these filmmakers were obviously very clued in. People like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, they know the score. They know what the agendas are. Stanley Kubrick knew what was going on. I personally feel that Kubrick was trying to wake humanity up.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think he was an exception to the rule. Yeah, I think there are a few exceptions to the rule.
Yeah, I think Kubrick was pretty upset with the so-called elite ruling class. He never really joined their ranks. He was always on the periphery of it. And there's a lot in his movies to suggest that he was trying to communicate what their agendas were. I personally feel that he was knocked off. They got rid of him when Eyes Wide Shut was about to be released. And we hear that there was 20 minutes of footage that was cut.
That's right.
Nobody's ever seen. And seemingly he just went too far. And they thought, no, we can't have this guy around anymore communicating this stuff.
Yeah.
But most of these filmmakers know what the agendas are.
Oh, yeah.
I think that, as you said, so many of them are set in these times, the 2020s, and they probably did feel at the time as if society would be very close to the sort of things being portrayed in these movies. And the fact that we are some way away from that still is possibly some means for optimism, because it may be in some way we've managed to stem the tide and we've managed to push back on these things, because I personally feel that these elite agendas, so-called, should be much further on than they currently are, according to their plans, according to documents they've put out, and particularly according to the clues they've put into TV shows and movies. I think they considered that by 2023, on the cusp of 2024, we'd be a lot closer to what we've seen portrayed in many of these movies. And, we're not.
The pushback has, I undoubtedly, the pushback has derailed some of it. Maybe delayed. I want to try and be optimistic about it and say that it's derailed it as opposed to delayed it. Yeah.
Look, mate, I mean, I've just got back from Australia. I got into Australia without a hitch. I did 4 talks communicating the information that I talk about, and I got back out again. In 2020, that was impossible.
Yeah, and you probably didn't think it ever would be possible at that point in time.
In 2020, I thought, well, that's it. I'm on
British
shores for the rest of my life because I'm never going to be able to travel again. But I did. And I think that's only because there's been pushback. There's been resistance. If everyone had sat on their asses and just put up with it, I mean, many did. But if everyone
unfortunately,
then we'd be in a very terrible state by now. And I think the fact that we've still got some relative freedoms of movement is testament to the power of large numbers of people pushing back and making a very clear statement that they're not having it, because these elite agendas are becoming very obvious now.
Oh, yes.
It's in their own writings, it's in their own documents. They feel the need to communicate it, not just symbolically in movies, which they love to do, but they actually come right out and tell you what they're doing. Schwab put a bloody book out telling you about how he wants to enslave you. I think so many people have got wise to this now that it has created a significant resistance. And those who have been pushing back have actually saved the hides of all the bloody masses that have sat around doing nothing, and they don't even realize it.
No, they don't know. No.
They don't even realize what a
they
terrible
think crazies and
what a
conspiracy
terrible place
theorists
they would be in if all of us had done nothing, and they probably never realize that.
So is there anything else you wanted to throw onto the table maybe before?
Well, not really. I think I've mentioned all the main themes that I wanted to in the movie. I just recommend that everyone watches it. Anyone that's got an interest in occult studies, arcane knowledge, symbolism, and themes that we're seeing getting expressed in society now should just take a look at this movie and just consider how long ago it was made, what knowledge was quite clearly there, and maybe watch it in two goes because it's a long movie, you know, and just really study it. And I just think everyone owes it to themselves to
absolutely, yeah. What I shall do as well, because there's lots of other little things that I picked up as I was watching it, but I'll throw some images up on this video as well when I edit it, so people can have a look at, maybe if we don't necessarily mention them, but at least people can sort of intuit what it's about. I noticed little things like in the cathedral where Maria's doing her sort of sermon, and there's like the shape of an eye, an all-seeing eye behind her, made out of the shapes of the candles, little things like that as well. Yeah, thank you so much, Mark, for coming on and doing this. I really appreciate it. It's
yeah, no worries. That was a different kind of conversation for me, because normally I speak about music and how entertainment has been weaponized and such. I don't really get into movies much, but I really enjoyed the conversation. It was really
good. Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you did. Yeah, I have as well. Yeah, definitely. It's been a great discussion, and I hope people will get something out of it. And again, if people want to check out Mark's stuff, please go and visit djmarkdevlin.com. Is there anything else that you've got coming up at the moment that you want to let people know about, or anything like that?
Well, if I may be allowed another shameless plug.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I've just put this out, and it's the sequel to the novel that I published in 2019, self-published, The Cause and the Cure. So it's many of the same characters. The original story was set in the early 90s in Oxford, which is where I grew up. And of course, the 90s was the best decade of all, just incredible times. But this story is set in 2001, so it's 10 years on, and it's against the backdrop of the 9/11 attacks. And the characters discover that there's a plot to have Oxford's very own 9/11 event. So that's the overall theme of the book. I really enjoyed the process of writing fiction. So I've written 3 non-fiction books, but I have discovered that I enjoy writing novels more because you can really explore your own imagination. You can literally have anything happen that you want to happen. You can put any words that you want into the characters' mouths. And the greatest thing about it is there's plausible deniability. So I call it truth fiction. So in these books, there's a whole load of truth bombs, and it all checks out. But if anyone ever challenged me on it and said, what are you doing making these crazy claims? You can't say that. I can say, well, chill out, man. You know, it's fiction.
It's a work of fiction. Yeah.
But actually, you're giving people a great deal of empowering truth dressed up as fiction, which is a great way to do it. I mean, that's what they do in the movies, right?
It is. Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, you turn on the BBC Evening News, you think you're getting truth. All you're getting is lies and deception, propaganda. Then you go to the cinema and you think, oh, this is wild escapism and imagination. And actually, you're getting programmed. You're getting told the truth.
I think it's the occult reversal. I absolutely do. I think it's the occult reversal. You know, what they tell you is the truth is the lie, and what the lie is the truth. You know, it's
So they put all kinds of truths in movies, and usually it's for, I would suggest, not entirely benevolent purposes.
There are some exceptions, like we say, Kubrick and people like that, you know. But
I think in a lot of cases they're mocking us, they're rubbing our noses in it, they're telling us what's coming. So I've put a lot of truth in my novels, but my truth is supposed to be empowering and uplifting, and it's helpful to people.
That's good.
It's benevolent in its intent. So that's why I enjoyed the process of it so much. I would love it to be made into a film. That would be awesome, but it's probably never going to happen.
You never know. Never say never.
All right. Other than that, thanks for getting me on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Hopefully we'll do it again at some point. Yeah. And if I do manage to get this video edited in time, I will just say that if you're in my neck of the woods, Mark will be speaking in Lichfield at the Social Club on Wednesday the 15th. Yeah.
Kicking off at about 7 p.m.
Yeah. Hopefully I will try and get it edited in time and get it up before then. But is it that the talk is the occult aspects of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones? Is that right?
Yep. So I've got 2 talks, dark occult aspects of the Beatles and dark occult aspects of the Rolling Stones. So I've kind of started this series. As I say, I've just done the one on Queen, and I'm probably going to go band by band for the rest of my natural life.
Okay. Please go over to Mark's channel, like, share, subscribe and that on YouTube. Mark Devlin, is it? Just Mark Devlin, the channel called?
It's DJ Mark Devlin.
DJ Mark Devlin, right. Okay. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I was thinking more of the YouTube channel as well and things like that. But you've obviously got platforms on BitChute and Odyssey as well.
Yeah, I mean,
like
I've had 3 YouTube channels deleted.
Yeah,
I'm on my 4th, so I use BitChute, Odyssey, and Rumble.
Okay, so there's
those.
all that there. Yeah. Okay then.
All right.
Right, great stuff.
Carl.
You take care of yourself. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching as well. And I will see you again very, very soon. Bye bye for now.
Cheers.